I wrote an article in the Messenger, or several articles in the Messenger a number of years ago about this topic, and I thought that I would make it into a PowerPoint because it is quite interesting, and there's more research coming out that it is just as important when we eat as what we eat. And when we eat is the timing of our meals. So when we eat during the day, when we have our meals, when we choose to have snacks, various things. So Sister White does talk about the timing of our meals, and she does mention it in various different places in her writings. So I'm going to refer to her writings as well, and then I'm going to just show you why she says what she did and how the science of today and the nutritionists of today are proving the same things that Sister White said about 150 years ago. So the first thing that I want to look at, why is it not moving? So we're first going to look at the timing of our meals, and we're going to look at unhealthy eating patterns. So when you think about different ways that you eat or different times of the day that you eat, there are some that are healthy and others that are unhealthy. And I'm going to show you 5 unhealthy eating styles, and I'm just going to show you pictures, and I want to see if you can guess what each picture might be, because I want it to be interactive because that helps to keep people engaged. So this is the picture. What could possibly be unhealthy about eating patterns in this picture? We've got a clock that's at 9 o'clock, then at noon, and then at 4 o'clock. Yes, Sister Linda.
There's only 3 hours between 9 o'clock and 12, so the food is barely starting to digest when you're putting more into your system.
Excellent. So the timing of our meals is having meals that are too close together.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the first slide. Now this is the second one. Let's see if you can guess this one. Who has an idea what this slide might be depicting? So, picture of a...
Water or milk, and what's that?
So it's basically a picture of a girl who's pushing her meal away.
Right.
That means she's not hungry. She don't feel like eating. Skip it.
Yeah, there you go, Anita. So she's skipping her meal. Okay, so skipping a meal is a second unhealthy eating habit. When we choose to not eat a number of meals a day, we decide to skip one. And then here's another one.
Grazing.
Good for you, Tina.
What was that? Grazing?
Grazing.
Ah,
Picture of horses, yes, grazing, which is eating multiple times throughout the day or eating nonstop. And then this one.
midnight snack.
Yes, so eating late at night. Exactly. And then the fifth one.
Wow. Eating too much.
Yeah, and at what time of the day?
Late in the night.
Yeah, because what is the clock is 6 o'clock and it shows a moon and a stars outside, so eating a big meal late at night. Okay, so those are the 5 unhealthy eating habits that Sister White talks about, and I'm going to talk to you why they're unhealthy, what it does to our body when we have any of these patterns of eating. So we're going to look at the science behind it. So like I said, eating meals too close together, skipping breakfast, eating small meals throughout the day, eating late at night, and eating too much at supper time. So when you think about yourself, what is your typical eating pattern in a day? You know, are you somebody who, what time do you have breakfast? You know, how long after you wake up do you have breakfast? Or do you even have breakfast? So these are questions to ask yourself as I'm going through the presentation and, reflect back on your own eating patterns. And then when do you have lunch? If you have breakfast, then when do you have lunch? And how many hours after breakfast do you have lunch? And then when do you have supper? How many hours after the previous meal? Or what time of the day do you have supper? What time do you go to bed? And when is the last meal before you actually go to bed? How long before your bedtime was your last meal? And do your eating patterns change from day to day? Like, do you find that during the week when you work, you have a certain eating pattern, and then when the weekend comes, do you change it? Do you change the time of day that you eat? Do you change the pattern of eating? Do you eat smaller meals at different times than what's normal during the week? And then the last one, do you snack in between meals? Or do you have your 3 meals and then you have another snack before you go to bed? So I'm not going to put anybody on the spot and ask if you have any of the, what your eating patterns are, because, we all are different and we all do things differently, but I'm going to show you why we need to avoid those 5 unhealthy eating patterns that I mentioned. So, who has heard of the 24-hour circadian rhythm, our body's internal clock? Okay. And can anybody just give me in a nutshell what it means? Who can describe it? Just quickly. Anyone have a thought?
You need to have at least 4 to 5 hours apart from each meal so the body can digest the food properly.
Yeah, I was just asking if you know what the circadian rhythm means. How to describe that, Linda? Yeah.
That's the 24-hour cycle that the body is programmed to run on. So when it's light, we usually are supposed to be up and out of bed and active. And if we do that in the morning, we take in melatonin, which helps us sleep at night when it's dark.
Mm-hmm.
This dictates the energy that we have during the day, and when we do things that we think are mundane, like going to the bathroom and things like that, everything is highly regulated.
Exactly. So highly regulated. So we have an internal clock that's within us. That this is how God built us. God designed us that all the body systems that we that allows us to function is based on a 24-hour time period, which is amazing. God created the world with 24-hour periods, and He designed our bodies to align with that 24-hour period. And there's so many things in our body that changes over that 24-hour period based on time of day. And often we think of the sleep-wake cycle as one of the main ones. We are awake during the day, we sleep at night because that's what our body does. We produce melatonin when it gets dark, so then we sleep. But everything, so many other body system functions on a 24-hour period. Our immune responses. Our immunity is lower at night. It's higher during the day. And digestion, which is what we're going to focus on today, the way we digest our food actually changes within a 24-hour period. So if we eat at a certain time of the day versus another, we're not going to necessarily digest our food as well. Our levels of alertness, when melatonin is produced, we actually, our bodies start to put ourselves into a mode of sleeping and restfulness. Hormones in our body change and fluctuate throughout the day. Cortisol, the digestive hormones, there's thyroid hormones. Every hormone in our body also has a 24-hour time period. Also our body temperature. We're warmest in the mornings, and at night when we sleep, our body temperature cools down. We've got this one area in our brain called the one moment. I wrote it down. Right here. There it is, sorry. Little disorganized. Suprachiasmatic nucleus. So it's one little area in the brain, it's in the hypothalamus, and what it does, it regulates all the clocks in our body. It sends the signal to every single time-sensitive function of our body, and it tells it when it should be awake, when it should be highly regulated, or when it can start shutting down. So this is amazing, and it doesn't have to do with anything external. Like even if we're inside and we're looking at bright lights at night, and that still doesn't affect our 24-hour clock. It does affect our ability to sleep well, but still the 24-hour clock continues regardless of how many days of daylight, or how many hours of daylight and how many hours of nighttime. So this is how God created us, and this is beautiful because everything that happens to us happens in that 24-hour period, and then He tells us that this is what you need to do at various times of the day to align your body with the clock that I have designed that's inside you. So the problem is that often our daily routines misalign with this circadian clock. And this can be linked to various health conditions if we don't align our lifestyles with this clock. We can have diminished cognitive function. Our memory and our thinking isn't as good. We can develop sleep disorders. We can gain weight. We have a heightened risk of things like diabetes and heart disease. Our immune system can be weakened. We can develop cancers. We can grow older faster. And we actually, if we continue to do this, we will have premature aging and we will have a shortened lifestyle. So now we're just going to focus on the digestive system and how the digestive system changes during this 24-hour period and what the body is telling us what we need to do. So we know that the digestive system is made up of various different parts. We start to digest our food in our mouth, it goes down to our stomach, then from the stomach it goes to the small intestine. The stomach breaks down the food with the gastric juices and acids. Then it goes to the small intestine where the food is broken down even further and then it's absorbed into our body. And then in the large intestine, the waste is eliminated. So the whole process of digestion from when we eat something to the time that that piece of food is eliminated can take anywhere from 24 to 72 hours. The 72-hour time period is usually with people who eat meat because it's harder to process meat because it's got the saturated fats in it. Animal proteins are very complex and they're harder to break down. People who are vegetarians and vegans tend to be more along the 24 to 48-hour time period. Yes, Linda?
What about if you eat a lot of coconut milk or coconut product? We're told there's a lot of saturated fat in coconut milk. Would that push you towards the 72 hours?
So the coconut milk will take longer to break down in our body. So definitely. So obviously all our foods digest at different times, right? So we ate a meal today at lunchtime. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats all take longer time to digest at different times. So our body is constantly having to adjust to the food that we take in, which is why it's not the greatest to eat a ton of different foods at the same meal, because then you can develop kind of indigestion. Yes, so anything that's saturated fat does take longer. The other interesting fact is that it can take up to 30% of the calories that we take in to actually digest our food. So if we eat a 2,000 calorie meal, 30% of that, over 600 calories is used just for digestion. And the interesting thing is when we eat whole foods, we use more calories to digest our foods than processed foods. Because processed foods are already broken down. They're processed, so our body digests it faster, and it uses less calories. So people who go to a whole food diet, who go away from processed foods, may eat the same amount of calories, but they may find that they're losing weight, and that's because it takes more energy to digest the food. And I've gone away from, I'm really trying not to eat processed foods, and I'm noticing that without even thinking about it, I'm losing weight because I'm eating whole foods more so than processed foods, and it's just consuming more calories. So, does our food digestion align with our circadian rhythm, our 24-hour clock? If everything else does, our digestion must also. So let's look at the way this works. So we have different parts of our digestive system, and I'm only going to focus on two because I won't get into all of it because then it's too much. So we have what are called digestive enzymes, and they're the things that break down our food. The peak performance of digestive enzymes is in the morning and early afternoon. So this is when the digestive enzymes can break down our food to be absorbed the best. And the peak activity is during the day, and it decreases as the day goes on, and it drops at nighttime. So if we're wanting to eat late at night, we find that we can't digest our food as well. Our gut motility, the way the food moves through our digestive system from our stomach to our small intestine to large intestine, it moves at a better rate during the day, and it slows down at night. So when you eat late at night, you're not able to digest your food as quickly. It takes longer to digest. And there's problems when you take long to digest your food, especially when food sits in your large colon for a long time. It's not healthy. And the food doesn't get absorbed as well. Also, the circadian rhythm influences our gut microbiome, the bacteria in our gut. That fluctuates on a 24-hour period. And if you eat at periods when you have high bacteria activity in your microbiome, you can introduce bacteria and there's slower digestion. Those bacteria can actually get absorbed into our body and we can, instead of it moving along the way it's supposed to. So now I'm going to talk about 2 hormones that it works to digest our food. So one is called ghrelin, the hunger hormone. So this is a hormone that our body produces when our stomach is empty and it says, wait a second, you need to eat. I need some more energy. I don't have anything in my stomach. So ghrelin gets produced by our stomach and our body, it sends a message to the brain that says, I better eat something. I better start looking for food because my body is clearly telling me I need it. So it sends a signal to the brain saying our energy stores are low and we need to eat. So the levels of ghrelin are highest before a meal. So when we have been fasting for a while and we haven't eaten, ghrelin all of a sudden spikes and says, you better eat. After we eat, it decreases because it stimulates hunger. After we've eaten, it's no longer needed, so the levels go down. Interesting thing is, if we eat at a time when we shouldn't, like at night, our ghrelin levels increase by 24%, which means that our appetite is increased even more at night when we are not supposed to eat, because ghrelin now, it's out of whack. It doesn't know what it's supposed to be doing. And you start eating at night and it actually stimulates more ghrelin and then we eat more. So there is a balance. It maintains a balance in our body by adjusting our hunger signals for the amount of food that we have in our stomachs and the amount of stores that we have in our body. So it's a fascinating hormone the way it works. Now there's another hormone that works completely the opposite. So ghrelin tells us, hey, there's no food in your stomach, I need to eat. Leptin tells us when we're full. So we've eaten a nice big meal and all of a sudden leptin gets released by our fat cells that says, hey, I have enough stores of nutrients in me, in my fat cells, stop eating. Okay, so I don't need any more food, I'm full. So this inhibits hunger and it suppresses our appetite. It also helps to decrease the amount of fat that's taken into the fat cells because fat cells say I have enough. When melatonin levels go up at night, leptin increases so that we don't eat. Okay, so leptin increases at night. It tells us that no, this is not the time you're supposed to eat, so we feel full at night for that reason as well. In the early morning, leptin levels decrease because it tells us that it allows to release ghrelin that tells us that we're hungry, that we need to eat. Eating close to bedtime can affect the leptin levels, leading to decreased leptin and makes us more hungry. So when we start to eat when we're not supposed to, the hormones don't do what they're supposed to. Yes, John?
Where can you get leptin?
Funny. I'm not sure if you can get it as a supplement, but
Certain foods have it, don't they?
I'm not sure.
I think beets do.
Okay.
What was that?
Beets, she thought that certain foods have it. So, so it's interesting. Leptin and ghrelin have like what's called a feedback loop. When one is high, the other one's low, right? So when leptin is high, ghrelin is low. So it means that when we're full and we don't need to eat anymore, ghrelin, which stimulates our appetite, is low because we don't need to eat. When ghrelin is high, when it says we need to eat, leptin, which suppresses our hunger, is low. So there's a constant back and forth with these two hormones to let us know when we need to eat and when we've had enough. So that's the two hormones that get affected by unhealthy eating patterns. Now there's 2 more I'm going to talk about, and this is the other 2, they're enzymes, and they also get affected by our eating habits. So insulin, who's all heard of insulin? Everybody knows what insulin is. Insulin is produced by our pancreas. It regulates our blood sugar, because what does insulin do? What does insulin do when we eat and we have lots of sugar in our blood?
Move sugar from blood to cell.
Yes, it goes from the blood to the cells. So insulin is great because what it is our cells need energy, right? Our cells need food. So insulin, when we eat a meal, it says, hey, here's a meal, there's lots of sugar in the bloodstream. Oh, good, I can feed myself by taking this blood sugar from the bloodstream and putting it into the cell. So we find that insulin levels are the lowest in the morning after we eat or after we sleep. However, when we eat, then the levels go high to allow us to absorb the sugar from our meal into the cells. And then if we eat, say we eat too much that our body doesn't eat in the moment, the insulin allows the liver and the muscles to store extra sugar, extra glucose, so that we can use it at a time when we're not eating and we need extra energy. Between meals, the insulin level just drops because we don't need it, right? Our blood sugar is stabilized, we've eaten, it's gone into our cells, and then it drops. Insulin sensitivity. Now, insulin sensitivity means how well our cells can take up sugar into themselves. So the sensitivity to insulin is the highest in the morning. So what does that tell us when we should be eating? Linda?
We should be having our biggest meal in the morning, so we get the most benefit from it.
Exactly.
Which is what Sister White says.
That's right, and that's when the insulin is most readily used by our cells. And insulin sensitivity decreases as the day goes on. So what happens when you eat late at night is insulin is not as sensitive to take the sugar into the cells, and then it stays in our bloodstream, and we can have higher sugar levels at night than during the day. We may not be eating any more calories, but the sugar stays high. Insulin resistance, which we find is a big issue, and that causes metabolic disorders, diabetes, is when our cells grow resistant to taking up sugar into our body. The insulin doesn't work as well, and the cells they don't get the sugar in, and it just stays in our bloodstream. Okay, so insulin is the one that I'm talking about from the pancreas, and then we're going to look at glucagon. Who knows about glucagon? We've all heard of insulin. Who's heard of glucagon? Okay, a few people. So the interesting thing about glucagon is works opposite to insulin. Just like you've got the ghrelin and the leptin, glucagon and insulin work hand in hand. It's also produced by the pancreas, but glucagon is used when we don't eat, when we're fasting, and when we don't have a meal inside us. It releases, remember I told you that we store sugar in our muscles and in our liver? Glucagon says, hey, we need more energy, the body needs it. You're not eating, I'm going to release some of the sugar that's in the cells. So it breaks it down and releases it into the bloodstream so that it can be used by the cells that need it. So the glucagon is elevated in the morning because it helps us maintain our sugar levels after a nighttime of fasting. So we've been fasting for, say, 12, 14 hours. Glucagon is going to be high because it's going to release extra sugar into our bloodstream so that we don't have those blood sugar drops after a period of not eating. It's also released between meals. Remember, insulin drops between meals because we don't have sugar that the cells need to take up, but glucagon is increased so that between meals, if we need extra energy, the liver and the muscles will release it for use. So it's the same way as with leptin and ghrelin. Insulin and glucagon work hand in hand to regulate blood sugar levels. And it allows there to be a balance so that the blood sugar levels don't go too high. So both of them are produced by the pancreas. People who have diabetes type 1, who are born and then they develop diabetes early at age, they are missing the beta cells, which produce insulin. Glucagon is still there, it is still produced, but the insulin, which allows the sugar to be taken up by the cells, is missing because the beta cells either are not there or they're too low. And it's interesting because these cells in the pancreas can detect when the blood sugar in the blood is too high or too low, and then it will release either glucagon or insulin. So this is amazing how our body just works so finely tuned that all these hormones are produced and triggered by various aspects of our body. So when we have insulin resistance, what can happen is glucagon levels can increase because, and it can elevate the blood sugars. So the best thing to do when we eat is to follow our body's circadian rhythm. You know, eat when the insulin is high and the glucagon is low. Eat, you know, when the hormone ghrelin is higher during the day. We eat, and then if we follow that 24-hour circadian rhythm, we can absorb and digest our food better. So then, if we follow the circadian rhythm, we should eat our largest meal in the morning when the levels of the hormone and the pancreatic enzymes are the highest. Eat a lighter meal at lunch, and then a light supper when there is less digestive function going on. Avoid eating several hours before bedtime because that's when these hormones are the lowest. And if we don't eat late at night, we can have a healthier digestive system, and we lower the risk of digestive disorders, weight gain, insulin resistance, and diabetes. So now I'm going to do a little quiz. So just to make sure that you've been listening to me and see if you are awake. Okay, so what are the benefits of a light dinner? Now that I talked about the different times of the day. A, is it increased energy levels for a nighttime workout? B, improved digestion and better sleep? C, enhancing mental clarity for late night studying? Or D, reduced risk of weight loss and decreased muscle mass? B, correct. So we eat a light dinner because we don't want to be digesting our food at a time when the body is not ready for food. And if we are digesting our food when we sleep, it disrupts our sleep. So the next thing we're going to look at is irregular meal times and the need for consistency. So, you know, people, like we saw on the first one, we don't have the proper amount of periods of time between our meals. Or on one day you may eat your breakfast at 9 o'clock, the next day you eat it at 11 because you decided to sleep in. Or sometimes you have breakfast like early in the morning because you're having to go somewhere, and so you eat really early. So this is not healthy either. So let's read what Sister White says first. What is her counsel about the regularity of eating? So if I can get Makoto, can you read this screen?
Since regularity of eating is of vital importance, there should be a specified time for each meal. At this time, let everyone eat what the system requires, and then take nothing more until the next meal.
Right, so she says that eat when the system needs it, and then nothing else until you need to eat again. And there should be a specific time. So you should have a specific time that you eat on a daily basis. Now this is difficult for people who are shift workers. I really struggle with this because I'm up at night, I'm sleeping during the day, and they say that the shift workers have a lot of problems with digestion and even with various health issues because you eat late at night. Okay, so there's another one another quote. Who can see this one to read it? Alexandria, can you see this one?
Yep. Neither should the meals be delayed 1 or 2 hours to suit circumstances or in order that a certain amount of work may be accomplished. The stomach calls for food at the time it is accustomed to receive it. If that time is delayed, the vitality of the system decreases and finally reaches so low an ebb that the appetite is entirely gone. If food is then taken, the stomach is unable to properly care for it.
Wonderful. So we can't say that, oh, we're so busy, we're out working. Instead of eating my lunch at 2, I'm going to eat it at 4. So this is disrupting our body. Our body gets habituated to when we eat, and it gets used to releasing hormones and insulin and glucagon at certain times. And if we all of a sudden disrupt even the patterns that we have on a consistent basis, we're going to introduce food at a time when our body system is not ready for it. And then that causes problems. And then what happens is if you take too long, those enzymes that should be produced, they just say, hey, we don't need to work. And then all of a sudden you introduce food and they're not ready. Okay, and of course this is what Sister Maria brought out and what Sister White says about the regular meals. Lynn, can you read this one?
After the regular meal is eaten, the stomach should be allowed to rest for 5 hours. Not a particle of food should be introduced into the stomach till the next meal. In this interval, the stomach will then be in a condition to receive more food.
Okay, so what tends to happen is every time you eat a piece of food, even if it's a large meal or say you eat a cookie in between your meal, that whole digestive process starts all over again. So what you are doing is you're introducing food when the stomach is not ready, because it takes time for the stomach to digest the food, and if we introduce food at a time when it's not ready, then we're going to cause a disruption in our digestion. So that's why she recommends it should be at least 5 hours. Some places she says 5 to 6 hours. So that allows the stomach to rest, because our stomach can be quite overworked if we allow it to continue all the time. Yes, brother?
Why if we drink water in between?
So water is different because water does not need to be digested by the stomach. And in fact, on my next slide, water takes 0 to 10 minutes to leave the stomach. Especially if you have water on an empty stomach, it basically just passes right through. So the stomach really doesn't need to do anything to digest water. So Sister White recommends that we have our water and our fluid intake after our meals, in between our meal times, because so that it doesn't impact the digestion of the food, and then the body can use it quite readily when it's on an empty stomach. So food stays in the stomach. If we look at this, fruit stays up to an hour, vegetables 1 to 2 hours, grains and beans 1 to 2 hours, nuts, seeds, and avocados 2 to 3 hours. And then you start looking at the meat at the bottom. Cooked meat and fish, 3 to 4 hours. Shellfish up to 8 hours. Now the interesting thing is that any improperly combined meal can take up to 8 hours. So we really have to be careful also about the foods that we combine in a meal. And I haven't been able, I think Lynn and I were talking about that. How do we know what foods we should combine and shouldn't? Sister White does talk about that we should try and avoid fruits and vegetables in the same meal. So that, it also depends on how you feel after you eat, what you can tolerate. So if you think about meat eaters, if we're supposed to eat, wait 5 hours in between meals, a lot of the meat hasn't even left the stomach or had a time to rest before you eat the next meal. So how does the stomach react to eating in between meals? So what happens is gastric acid, which breaks down the food, is constantly being produced if we're eating in between meals. And it depletes the stomach's energy. We produce constantly gastric acid. We can develop ulcers. We can get inflammation. It can break down the lining of our stomach. And it slows down the emptying of the stomach if we're constantly putting food into it. And it sits in the stomach for longer, impairs the nutrient absorption, because if it stays in the stomach for longer periods, we can't use the food to absorb into our body. And then the inflammation that we produce in the stomach can contribute to overall body inflammation, which we know is very unhealthy. It impairs the ability for the macronutrients to be broken down. Okay, so another quiz time. Okay. What is the benefit of waiting at least 5 hours in between meals? A, increased insulin resistance and blood sugar spikes. B, improved digestion and reduced digestive upset. C, enhances cognitive function and mental clarity. Or D, it decreases the cells to be able to renew themselves. So what's the benefit? Which one of these is a benefit of waiting 5 hours? B, right. It improves our digestion and less digestive upset because it allows our stomach to rest. It allows the whole digestive system to slow down. Now, of course, because food takes up to 48 hours to be eliminated, parts of our digestive system is being used all the time, but it's the stomach that is the one that can feel the effects of overwork, and that is impacted by eating constantly. So the other thing that I brought out is we shouldn't skip breakfast. We should eat a hearty breakfast. So what does Sister White say about breakfast time? Linda, can you read this?
It is the custom and order of society to take a slight breakfast, but this is not the best way to treat the stomach. At breakfast time, the stomach is in a better condition to take care of more food than at the second or third meal of the day. The habit of eating a sparing breakfast and a large dinner is wrong. Make your breakfast correspond more nearly to the heartiest meal of the day.
Okay, so Sister White said this about eating a hearty breakfast, and from what we've learned today, we've proved that all the digestive enzymes and the digestive hormones are at their peak to accept food and to digest it the best in the mornings. So what happens when we skip breakfast? So when we skip breakfast, what we are doing is we're not allowing our body to use the food that we eat at the time that it's best ready to take in the food. And what happens afterwards? What happens when you skip breakfast? What do you typically do?
Snack.
Yeah, you snack, or then you eat too much at other times. So people who skip breakfast, then they feel really hungry later on, and then they eat too much. So there's always a risk of overeating if you skip breakfast, and then you have the risk of also grazing, where you're just going to eat during the day just to satisfy that hunger that you have. Our cognitive function, our thinking, and our energy is lower, obviously, if we're not supplying the body with nutrition. It also slows down our metabolism because our body says, I've got to conserve energy because I don't have any food in me. And so your whole metabolism of your system slows down, and that actually can lead to weight gain, not weight loss. Okay, another quiz. Why do we eat the large breakfast in the morning? To reduce the calories that we eat for the rest of the day, A. B, to match energy intake with energy expenditure, as the body's energy needs are highest in the morning. C, to improve digestion and reduce bloating. Or D, to aid in weight loss by skipping lunch.
I think all the answers are B. B.
Yes, B. Oh, whoops.
Are.
Maybe I set up these questions wrong. Yes. So when we need the most energy is when we should be eating the biggest meal of the day. Okay. So now we're going to look at the next unhealthy eating habit, and that's eating before bed or late at night. Okay, a lot of times people, it becomes a habit, right? You feel like you need a snack before you go to bed. Or some people I've heard, like, I can't eat unless I sleep unless I have a full stomach. And so people eat before they go to bed. And that becomes a habit, and there's real risks with doing that. Or if we eat our dinners late at a time, too close to our bedtime. So let's read what first the Spirit of Prophecy says. What does Sister White say here? Who can read this? Yelenia, are you able to read the screen?
Sure. Another pernicious habit is that of eating just before bedtime. The regular meals may have been taken, but because there is a sense of faintness, more food is eaten. By indulgence, this wrong practice becomes a habit and often so firmly fixed that it is far impossible to sleep without food.
Right, so you feel the sense of faintness. It doesn't mean that you're hungry. It could mean that you're tired, or you've eaten too much at supper time, and your stomach is working so hard that you feel, the low energy, because that's at a time when you have lower energy levels anyways, because your body is being prepared for sleep. So then you think that, no, I have to eat every time before I sleep. So actually, Lenia, you can continue, because this is the quote. It's the next page now.
As a result of eating late suppers, the digestive process is continued through the sleeping hours. But though the stomach works constantly, its work is not properly accomplished. The sleep is often disturbed with unpleasant dreams, and in the morning the person awakes unrefreshed and with little relish for breakfast.
Okay, so what happens at night? You continue that digestion through the night, because remember, the stomach needs 5 hours to empty. And so the stomach is working while you're trying to sleep. And so our sleep gets disturbed because it's hard to sleep when the body is needing to work. Often we can have unpleasant dreams, nightmares, and in the morning you feel unrefreshed. And then because you've eaten so late at night, you don't feel like eating breakfast. And now you're avoiding eating at the time of the day when you should be having your biggest meal. And then the final part of this quote, Yelenia.
When we lie down to rest, the stomach should have its work all done, that it, as well as the other organs of the body, may enjoy rest. For persons of sedentary habits, late suppers are particularly harmful. With them, the disturbance created is often the beginning of disease that ends in death.
Okay, so the Ministry of Healing, page 303. So when we lay down, the stomach should be done its work, And it says that for people who don't do a lot of physical exercise during the day, it's even worse to eat late at night, and it can bring on disease. So AI created this lovely picture of a boy and his stomach both happily sleeping at night. All right, so let's, now we're going to look at the science as to why Sister White made these recommendations. So eating before bedtime or late at night, it affects our ability to absorb nutrients, and then it can lead to deficiencies in nutrients. We don't absorb our food as well, and if we constantly eat late at night and we don't eat as much during the day, we're going to we can develop some nutrition problems. So what happens at nighttime is ghrelin production increases. So when you eat at a time when you're not supposed to. Remember, ghrelin stimulates appetite, right? So what happens when you eat is ghrelin actually increases when you're eating because it says, hey, my levels are supposed to be high. But the problem is it goes to 24% higher than it should during the day. And so we even get more hungry when we eat at night. We tend to then overeat, or we eat a lot because ghrelin is stimulated at night from eating. The leptin levels, which tells us that, hey, you've had enough food, stop eating, it actually decreases at night by 18%, and thus our ability to curb our hunger is lessened. So we can't know when to stop eating. We tend to overeat when we do that. And the problem is that we tend to like carbohydrates, high-density carbohydrates, sugary meals when we eat in the evenings. This can cause sugar spikes. You can develop insulin resistance because all of a sudden your body is overloaded with sugar, and the insulin is not at its peak at that time. Remember, its production has slowed down. It doesn't have the capability to take up all that sugar into the system, and our blood sugar goes high. And it disrupts the glucagon-insulin balance at that time. So they did this interesting research study. They had people eat the exact same meal at 6 p.m. and at 10 p.m. And what happened with these two people? So those who ate the later meal at 6 p.m. had 30% higher blood sugar levels. Same meal. Less breakdown of fat in their body by 20%. So now there's increased fat that stays stored in our bodies. And also cortisol, which is another hormone that I didn't talk about today, is also elevated, which can lead to weight gain because cortisol is the stress hormone, and when you produce cortisol, your body tends to retain weight because it feels that it needs to do that when you're under stress. So this study shows that even when you eat the identical meal, the body processes it completely differently depending on the time of day that you eat it. So that's why we also have to be mindful about the time that we eat. It also impairs our quality of sleep because it causes cortisol to go up and adrenaline. We know that adrenaline is kind of what keeps us awake. So we have a hard time falling asleep, and we have a hard time with the quality of sleep. And the poor digestion, because our body is not ready to digest the food, we can lead to gastric upset, bloating, gas. You can get acid reflux for people who are prone to it when you lie down, that worsens. And then we have lower energy and concentration the next day, and it disrupts the sleep-wake cycle. So now it's impacting another part of our body systems that is supposed to work on a 24-hour period. Now, what does late-night eating actually do to the type of food we eat? This is interesting that I found, and I didn't realize that this actually occurs. When you eat at night, the appetite for carbohydrate-rich foods increases by 43%. So already our body is saying, hey, I want something that's sugary when we eat at night. However, what it does is it actually affects our whole eating patterns, even during the day. So that once we start eating these sugary foods at night, we start craving those sugary foods even during the day. And so we have habituated our body into eating these foods that we shouldn't. So sleep-deprived people, those who don't sleep well, and poor digestion will cause that, they crave high-calorie, high-fat, and high-sugar foods. Insufficient sleep affects the part of the brain that determines how we think about food. So now it's affecting our mental abilities and how we look at food. Once we start eating late at night, we look at food as a reward because we're wanting to, satisfy that craving that we have just before we go to bed. And so it becomes almost like an emotional eating. We become more impulsive and we make poor food choices during the day. And then we also increase the chance of eating too much because we're eating now high-calorie foods. So eating late at night can affect our whole 24-hour period of food intake. Okay, another quiz time.
The
Nope.
Question yet.
What is a common effect of eating late at night? A, oh, I forgot to put the letters. Well, consider A, B, C, and D. Improved digestion and nutrient absorption, increased feelings of fullness and satisfaction, disrupted circadian rhythms and increased cravings for unhealthy food, or enhanced mental clarity and focus.
C.
C. Yes, the one that should be C. Correct. So it disrupts our circadian rhythm and increases cravings for unhealthy food. Okay, so now we're going to look at the last one. Grazing. And I put here, we are not cows or horses. Okay, so grazing is something that a lot of people do. What is grazing?
Non-stop
Eating throughout the day, just constantly snacking.
Exactly. Now, cows and horses, their bodies are created to do that, right? That's what they do. They say that if you give horses, you know, if they're stuck in a stall in a barn, and you just give them 3 meals a day, that actually disrupts their ability to absorb food properly because they should be eating throughout the whole day. So a lot of what we do with horses these days really impacts their digestion, and that's why a lot of horses, they can develop things like colics, and it's quite unhealthy for them. But we are the opposite. So what does Sister White say about grazing? Richard, can you read this screen?
Sure. There are many who eat when the system needs no food at irregular intervals and between meals because they have not sufficient strength of will to resist inclination. When traveling, some are constantly nibbling if anything edible is within their reach. This is very injurious. They would not feel so great weariness nor suffer so much from sickness.
Okay. And, you know, sometimes I very enjoy how direct Sister White is. Right? She just tells it like it is sometimes. Right? So it says that you don't have the strength to resist. And I don't know how many times, you know, I go to work and all of a sudden somebody brings in treats. I've had breakfast and then all of a sudden the treat is in front of me. I do admit I will grab it when I shouldn't because it's there and oh, that looks good. So you eat it. I do less of that now, but that was a risk. Or when you're traveling, you're in the car or you're in a train and you're constantly just putting food in you because it's something to pass the time away and
Addictive.
yeah, and it becomes addictive. So Sister White says that if you didn't do that, you would not suffer so much from sickness. Okay, so let's look at the risks of grazing. So what does grazing do? It leads to insulin resistance, which means that our cells don't take up sugar as well because insulin is constantly being produced, and when insulin is constantly being produced, our cells get tired and they don't take up the insulin. So what do when that happens? We eat more. And why do we eat more? Because our cells, they feel like they're starving, so they need more sugar. So we actually eat more when we have insulin resistance and when we graze. When we graze, it stimulates us to eat even more. So it puts a strain on the pancreas and the cells become less sensitive. Leads to increased blood sugars. So they say that grazing is one of the risks of type 2 diabetes, is that when you're eating constantly. The glucagon, remember the glucagon that's produced to release energy from cells when we might need it, when we're not eating? They're reduced so that we have a harder time actually recovering from low blood sugar episodes. So basically what it does is it just throws off the whole blood sugar balance in our body. So the ghrelin, remember the ghrelin and the leptin? Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, leptin, the I'm full hormone. So elevated ghrelin levels, because when we eat or when we actually think of eating, ghrelin goes up. It stimulates it and it actually increases our hunger because it anticipates when we have food. So even when we look at food and we get this craving, ghrelin gets released. And then when we eat it, we eat the food, then we've got high levels of ghrelin in our body, and it can stimulate hunger and food-seeking behaviors. And then leptin gets decreased, which is the I'm full hormone, and it desensitizes the body to those signals so that we eat too much. Like when you graze, if you think about it, you're putting in small amounts throughout the day and you never feel full, right? So that's the part of our hormone system that has become imbalanced, that our body doesn't say, hey, it's had enough, we don't need anything more. So the consequences of grazing is weight gain, diabetes, and then eating disorders like binge eating and bulimia. People who eat and then they realize they've eaten too much, they'll vomit to reduce the amount of calories, so it can cause eating disorders as well. Okay, last quiz time. What are the health risks of grazing? A, improved insulin sensitivity and reduced inflammation. B, enhanced digestion and reduced digestive upset. C, increased risk of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Or D, reduced risk of cardiovascular disease and obesity. C, correct. So increased insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Okay, so what are we taking away from this meeting? What is it telling us? What are the things that we need to do? We need to eat breakfast between 8 and 10 a.m. in the morning. That's actually the time when our body's the highest in our digestive, it prepares for digestion. Second, have at least 5 hours between meals. Don't overwork your stomach. Do not eat any food in between your meals. Not even one morsel, because that will increase or cause the digestive system to start working again. Eat a light supper so that you don't put too many calories in at a time when your hormones, your digestive hormones and enzymes are at a lower peak, so you can't take in as much food readily. And then don't eat late at night, because eating late at night, again, puts that imbalance of our hormones where we eat too much. It's interesting, there's a new research coming out, and they're calling, nutritionists are calling it chrononutrition. So this is something they're looking at, specifically times of eating. So this is it's very new, and it's a growing field of research, and it basically, nutritionists are looking at a different way to look at food and health. So instead of just focusing on nutrients and calories, they are looking increasingly at meal timing and how that influences our body. And they have seen how the timing of our meals can really influence our health in a negative way if we eat when we shouldn't be eating. And because of the way that our body clocks are, they have identified that the earlier in the day that you eat your food, the better it can metabolize, and as the day goes on, it becomes less and less and less. You know, Sister White talked about 2 meals. So at a time, like later on in her life, she was only eating 2 meals a day. She would have her first meal at around 8 o'clock in the morning, and she would have her second meal at 1:30 in the afternoon, and she would eat nothing after that, and until the next morning again. And she actually recommends that if you can, and if your body can absorb enough calories in 2 meals, it's actually a healthier way to do it, because then you're giving your body a prolonged time of rest from digestion. People who ate their meals earlier in the day had greater improvements in blood sugar, cholesterol, and insulin sensitivity. So this is what they're finding now with this doing research into the timing of meals. And I said that I think Sister White said all of this 150 years ago, and if people would just have read their books, we would have been much healthier, much sooner. And the final quote is on this last page, and maybe, who can see it? Tina, can you see it from the back there? I don't know, or move up.
Every law governing the human machinery is to be considered just as truly divine in origin. In character and importance as the Word of God, every careless action, any abuse put upon the wonderful mechanism by disregarding his specified laws of the human habitation is a violation of God's law. This law embraces the treatment of the entire being. God's law is written by his own finger upon every nerve, every muscle, every faculty which has been entrusted to man.
Amen. Wonderful. So here it says that the laws that govern our body have been created also by God. He has created the clock in our body. He has created the mechanisms that allow us to survive, to live, to eat, to sleep. All those things he has given us, and that is just as divine in origin as his law. So he says that, to break the laws of health and to disregard the body that God has given to us and how it should work is just as egregious as breaking the 10 Commandments. So it's my wish and prayer that we would all focus on what we are doing when we eat our meals, when we are eating our meals, and to do it so that we can glorify God in our body. Amen.